say a few words about yourself for the people here that that do not know you already, even though most of them do. So, Professor Jan Klabbers, The Journey of Change, Mapping the Process, with his keynote.
Thank you, Catalina. Good morning to all of you, and I'm happy to see many of you that I have not seen for a couple of years, and also newcomers to the field. Can you hear me? This is better? Okay. The theme of this week's conference is the journey of change, mapping the process. And that is quite a wide and open theme. You see here an illustration of the night sky 3.75 billion years from now. And you see that the Andromeda galaxy on the left fills the field of view and begins to distort the plane of our Milky Way galaxy. And then the question is, how does it impact on Mother Earth? These images fit well in the theme of the conference, but I guess you are not astronomers. So if I would continue elaborating on galaxies, I'm addressing the wrong audience. So I have to make some adjustments and I have to focus on more narrow ideas on change. And for that reason, my talk is about framing change, reflection in action. I will show you a number of images of flux and transformation, all related to change. But the question is change also similar to development, improvement, or innovation? And that remains to be seen. Again, starting with Mother Earth, we know all that the world is changing. So that focus is not quite particular of value for this conference. If you have read the outline of my presentation, then in the outline I use a very important idea, and the idea is on the preconception of order. We can only talk about change, we can only talk about evolution or development and information if we have, prior to looking at change, a prior idea, an idea or a preconception of order. But if you start reflecting on the idea of order, then let us go back to the universe. And in the universe you can notice galaxies, stars, planets, Earth, ecosystems, biotopes, societies, human beings, living organisms, molecules, atoms, subatomic particles, and elementary particles. And I would say that the realm of game science and the scope of game science starts with the Earth and somehow ends up with living organisms. So that's the realm of game science. It's important also to notice that these different entities are not reducible to each other. They have in common that each is made up of organized elements that form a whole. Terms that convey the meaning of that whole are system, organization, network, and interrelation. So I will use these terms as preconceptions of order. And to give you a bit more idea on what are the commonalities and the differences between systems, networks, and organization, systems have well-defined boundaries. Networks have limits that vary. They can contract, they can expand. An organization, the idea of organization, connects parts to each other and parts to the whole. They represent interconnections of elements and form an organized whole. Pascal has expressed the circular reciprocity between parts and the whole by pointing out that it's impossible to know the parts without knowing the whole, or to know the whole without knowing the parts. And this, so the idea of organization or of organized whole, to my point of view, very fruitful on gaming and game science. There is when you look at the idea of organization and organized whole, there is a very important concept of emergence. Emergence is a very important idea coming from complexity science and chaos and order. Morin mentions that all organizations produce something beyond their components. The organization itself, the global unit constituting the whole, and both are quite important and important ways related, and the new qualities and properties that emerge from the organization and global unit. These new qualities or properties are called emergencies. Emergencies have an innovative character with respect to the qualities of the components they taken separately and structured differently in another type of organization. So the properties of the whole are not the sum of the parts. The whole behaves differently in all circumstances. Emerging qualities feed back on parts and give them qualities that they could not have if they were isolated from the organized whole. And the whole is not only more than the sum of the parts, but the part of that whole is more than a part by virtue of the whole. This applies especially to games with actors as parts of a special kind. Parts that are reflexively interact in the construction of the social system which the game represents. So emergence is a basic property of organization. It has a new quality that arises once the organization is formed, and the idea of emergence relates to innovation because it's a new quality with respect to previous qualities of the single elements. So at the moment you start playing games, especially games with more than one player, then actually you form an organized whole, and each of the participants, because of being part of the organized whole, changes somehow the organized whole, the organization, the parts and the whole, and by definition, that emergence is already an innovation, is already a change. That's only when you enter the game and you assume your roles. Organizations change over time. To understand those changes, it's fruitful to realize that the organized entity is one and homogeneous from the viewpoint of the whole, and different and heterogeneous from the point of view of the constituents, the parts, the elements. The organized entity can be decomposed into separate parts, but that changes its existence. So if you separate parts of a game, it's not the same game anymore, and the parts are changing as well. As said, games are organized wholes. The properties of the whole in any game are not the sum of the parts. The whole, any game, behaves differently in all circumstances. Emergent properties apply especially to games with actors as components of a special kind, and reflexivity is a very important idea in that regard. Reflexively in interacting and constructing reality within the social system makes a game a special kind of organized whole. Social systems, let's say now I change the idea of game to the idea of a social system, and I will show later how they connect. Social systems, in social systems, human beings engage in social activity and produce structures and cultures that have emerging properties of their own. Because of the parts change, the interrelationships change, and the whole changes. So you have a very, at least on two levels of abstraction, you see all kind of changes happening. Those properties relate to particular ways of interaction, ways of communicating, of working together, of utilizing technology, in general to rules and procedures, which are assertions about how things are interconnected or should be interconnected. Such properties are sustained and reproduced by human activity, and they constitute durable networks of organization. They are intertwined with the geographic region of the ecosystems involved. These properties are being inscribed in the structure of social organization and shape a particular culture with specific behavior codes, beliefs, attitudes, norms, and values. So this is, let's say, a general frame of reference that I need as a preconception of order to understand gaming, to understand games. And now I switch to provide you with a number of images of change, and I will elaborate on these further. This is an ecosystem, that's the Amazon. It's in a constant flux and transformation because it's a home of rainforests. A rainforest as a particular ecosystem. A desert is another example of an ecosystem. The Antarctica is again another one. So the tundra, savanna, these are all ecosystems, you might say, as natural objects that can be studied. And ecosystems are in an evolutionary process of change driven by natural causes, and nowadays, as we know, also driven by human influence on global climate change, on global warming. All these images that I have shown you as images of ecosystems, as natural environments, they are linked to the human environment, and the human environment, by definition, has many qualities of an artificial environment. These are human constructions. And so I give you some interfaces between the natural environment, you might say the ecosystems that we can find on this earth, and societies. This is a very striking example of an interface between geology, geophysics, marine ecosystems, and social systems. On the left, to my left, here, you can see it. You see there is a tsunami is approaching a city. And it's a very important, very powerful, but also very threatful kind of interface between natural environments and artificial environments such as cities. This is the result. This is another example of a human construction, in this case Fukushima power plant, embedded in an ecosystem in Japan. And this is what you see after the tsunami had hit that nuclear plant. So you see that the interfaces between the natural and the cultural or artificial environment and the change that you see here, this change is not always an improvement. It's not always a development. It's not always a case of a better situation. As a result of what happened with Fukushima in Japan, on May the 5th, Japan switched off its last working nuclear reactor as part of the safety drive since the March 2011 tsunami that triggered a meltdown at the Fukushima plant. But on June 16, Japan has announced that it will restart 2 nuclear reactors, and the move is necessary to prevent power shortage. That's at least the message of the government. But also you can say that it means that the Japanese government, especially the Japanese industry, needs resources like energy, electric energy, to run the economy. So now let's move on from the ecosystems idea and the interfaces between ecosystems as natural objects and social systems as artificial objects, to take a look at on some artifacts and artificial environments. Would you say that this image is an image of a natural ecosystem? It's a beautiful garden, but it's a construction. It's human. It's an artifact. But it's not, as such, an ecosystem as the one that I showed you earlier. This is another image of an artificial environment. And this artificial environment and this image has, I would say, some confusing and some dual symbols, some dual values that are connected to this image, to this artifact. And when you look at these images that are related to it, then you know that more than 20 years ago, this was a result, this artificial environment, these artifacts, were a result of urban development. At the same time, demolishing larger parts of Bucharest. And so you might have quite confusing feelings about these images. And especially people from Romania, I think, will have second thoughts about the meaning of these images. How do these images and these artificial environments connect to game science? Well, to understand that, I need to take a step in between. And first I have to talk about the idea of social systems. And there are 3 basic strata of, or description levels of social systems. This is culture, structure, and technology. But these conceptions are always, you should always see as very closely connected to the natural environments and the ecosystems that are involved. So this is actually the basic image of social activity in a natural environment. If you look at and you keep in mind this image, then translating the image of this building and this result of urban development in a certain political area, then I would say what you see, the building as such, is a result of technology embedded in a natural environment and in an ecosystem that was there already a long time ago, before Bucharest was a city. So the focus of this image is the focus on technology, is the focus on resources, on artificial resources. This also applies, this framework applies to the nuclear plant of Fukushima. The nuclear plant is also a result of technology, of human knowledge, human intervention, of artificial objects, embedded in that specific area as a natural environment and an ecosystem. And where this artificial environment, that interface between the natural environment, you have seen through the idea of the tsunami. So now, with this frame of reference in mind, I switch to game science and game methodology. How can we use gaming, game science and game methodology to capture the ideas of how our world is ordered, what kind of preconceptions of order we have, and how game science might help to better understand those artificial environments in connection with the natural environments, and to see how we can change and improve the interfaces. In general, when you look at the literature on organization and management science and also in sociology, then you see that the architecture of social systems looks as follows. There is on one level, you have actors or agencies or agents that interconnect, and they form a certain culture. They apply and develop rules, and those communication rules generate a certain structure, communication structure in vertical and horizontal kind of way. And every social system uses resources to change and improve life and living conditions. But in resources, you should always think about technology in combination with ecosystems. So that's a basic idea of resources. So you see, again, actors, rules, and resources connected to culture, structure, and technology. This framework fits very well in the architecture of games. Because so in games, we are familiar with the idea of actors, players, player groups. We are familiar with rules, and we are familiar with resources. When you play the game of chess, you have two players, two actors. You have a set of rules that apply to both of them, so they play with the same set of rules. And as the resources is the board and the pieces. And you can understand and deconstruct any game with this framework. But the interesting thing is also that these actors, they form a social organization. The rules and procedures follow ideas on assertions and inscriptions that we use in social systems. And as resources, we use in games media of representation. That can be a board game, but also can be computer interface. So we have here a very simple, but also very powerful construct to understand gaming and games. Give you some ideas on purposes of gaming, of games. Games can make social systems more visible to themselves. Many times I use games to make an organization visible to itself, that people say, oh, that's that kind of mirror they use, because it's enlightening how things are connected. And they usually, people working in an organization, don't have access to this overview. And the game is kind of a mirror that helps them understand the organization. Games can be used for facilitating learning and understanding within an organization, designing new forms of management and organization, understanding the emerging properties of complex social systems of the kind that I just elaborated on, and from the point of view of the idea of organization. When we play games, and we think about games and try to understand what's happening, it's important to understand that the meaning of playing games, is actually a result of three components. You have the game form, that can be a board game, can be a computer game, can be free-form games, can be a rule-driven game. We have available a whole variety of forms of games. Games are loaded with content, and they are played in a certain context. That can be, when you play a computer game, a video game, the context can be entertainment. But for Isaga Entertainment, we are not in the entertainment business. We are trying to use games to improve practice, to understand things better with regard to social systems. So if we use games for learning, for training, for management and organization development, that context in combination with game content and game form, they define the meaning of a certain play. And a game is only a game if it is being played. If you keep it in the box, it's not a game. It only becomes a game as you become active as players. A road to learning with the purpose to enhance change connects individual learning, organizational learning, and societal learning. And games have been developed and are still being developed on each of these levels. So games that improve and enhance individual learning, games that are meant to improve the skills and competencies of people working in an organization and improve the competencies of the organization as a whole. It's organizational learning. And we have quite a long history and experience with the games that help us to understand societal changes. Now I make a next switch in my line of reasoning, in my argumentation. And the key term now is design. And what is design? When we talk about artifacts, human constructions, you cannot talk about artifacts, human constructions without the idea of design. So design is a core idea in gaming. And everyone designs who devises courses of actions aimed at changing existing situations into preferred one. This idea on design from Herb Simon, 1968, is very powerful concept that he further elaborated on in The Sciences of the Artificial, a book that he wrote in the 1960s. I would say design is intended change to serve human purposes. And in terms of design and understanding the design development of games and building games, and also the idea of using games for training and educational purposes, it's important to understand, to connect the design and the use of games in two sources of knowledge. There are many more sources of knowledge, and I will elaborate on some of them later in my talk. But this one is I think, very fruitful. You have declarative and procedural knowledge. Declarative knowledge refers to facts, concepts, principles, and laws. It's knowing that. I would say it's explicit knowledge that can be coded, encoded, and can be transferred through email, through the internet. Procedural knowledge concerns procedures, strategies, and action sequences. It's knowing how. And knowing how is to a certain extent related to rules of the game. Because in the rules of the game, the steps as designer, the steps we design, we build in procedural knowledge. And also you have, in this connection, procedural tacit knowledge, knowing how the organization functions and what people are operating. And that's a very powerful idea to understand what's happening when you play games, especially games that are related to typical organizations and organization development. But to move on the further on the idea of design, I would like to introduce you to the realm of gaming and game science with this scheme in mind. As gamers, we can use games to design a new situation, to learn people, to make visible the kind of organization that they operate in, and to improve existing situations into preferred ones. But it's also possible, and in the literature you find ample evidence about this, you can also use games to develop and test theories. Theories of human behavior, of social behavior, group behavior. And these two realms are actually, game science covers both. You can make a decision that you want to use gaming for a certain period of time to develop and test theories. In that case, you will be part of the analytical sciences, and you will become a member of a community of observers. You do not take part in the processes that happen, you observe them and try to theorize about them, to see patterns, and you use these patterns and this knowledge for whatever reasons that the theory you have developed, the purpose of those theories. The other focus is that you say, well, forget about the theories, I'm interested in designing games to change the existing situation and another one, and make change, improvement. In that case, you move to the upper right domain, and you talk about building, assessing, and implementing games. So you design a game, you use it and see how it works, you assess its value, and if it's operating well, then you implement it as part of a change process. For this talk and for this morning, I will not focus on the analytical sciences, I will focus on the design sciences, because that is actually where I see where the big challenges lie ahead of us. You can also use that scheme to see how would you approach a certain situation with game design and the use of games, keeping that in mind. So you have a time path, you start at time t, and at time t you observe and study a certain social system, and you start with the problem identification. From that problem identification, you take a next step, you start with game design, in this case artifact development. And once that game is in place, and I call this design in the small, you start using the game to play games, to learn from it, and to see how you can train and educate people. That produces knowledge, that produces understanding and awareness, and that awareness and knowledge you link to the system involved in the terms of that you offer them usable knowledge. And this linking process, you hope eventually, and during implementation, will result in the utilization of that knowledge and to change the policy development process. But already, usually, that sequence takes quite a lot of time, can be 3 months, can be 12 months, but also could be a couple of years. So the policy development process has changed again already, and then the question is, if the knowledge that you offer is not outdated, is not obsolete at the moment you come with the knowledge from gaming, or for whatever change management process. So these are the tricks that you are involved in, and then you see that the game design as such, I call design in the small, but the change of the organization, the implementation process, and the changes that you hope to implement in the organization, I call design in the large. You can also say it's organizational development is design in the large. Now, from the point of view of game design, it's when you enter a situation, it's very important to understand what kind of policy problems am I engaging and how can I deal with them. And I use this typology to understand the situation I enter. And you see there are two dimensions. One, that is, do I have knowledge available? Am I certain about the knowledge that I need or not? And the other is, what values are at stake? And in the first, when you combine knowledge and values in the first cell, there you see that when you are certain about your knowledge or the knowledge that is available, and there is consensus with the client in terms of the values that are at stake, then in that case, the game design is actually design in terms of a manageable knowledge problem. And usually management trainings restrict themselves to this first cell. When when you're uncertain about knowledge, I might envision a game that is related to research and development to gain knowledge and use that knowledge development process for the design of games. And it might turn out that that new knowledge that I need might be tractable, but also might be that it's intractable. So research and development games are of a different type as the usual business simulations for the first cell. If there is consensus, then you can also understand that in terms of the goals that the social system or organization is trying to achieve, that you are dealing with competitive goals. And competitive goals, you need to rank order. So this is the first one, this is the most important, and then you have the second one, etc. So this is a framework for designing games, which is very different from the next level, if in the level of that there is dissension in terms of norms and value, because then you are dealing with conflicting goals. With conflicting goals, you can imagine that you enter a T-crossing. And when you come at a T-crossing, you either have to turn left or you have to turn right. That's it. And conflicts about values are mainly, you might say, T-crossings. And the design of games that relate to this kind of dissension, you can distinguish the games, management games and also organizational games that deal with ethical issues, and these games are available. And the most, at least from my point of view, the most challenging, the most difficult, but also the most enjoyable kind of game design are the games that relate to dissension, so different goals, different norms and values, and high uncertainty about knowledge. Then you actually enter the political arena. And there you can say gaming has all the advantages of using games to better understand political arenas, political processes. So I use this typology, for me, let's say, as a quick and dirty understanding what kind of situation do I enter when I design a game. When you play a game, you are dealing with situated learning and conceptual and embodied learning. And I will show later on what I mean with this distinction. But providing the theme of this week's conference, we are talking about change. But you can only talk about change if there is action. You can only talk about action and the result of action if you assume that the audience, your target group, is adaptable and is able to adapt to a certain situation. That can usually a new situation. And that they have to learn in that new situation how to behave, what kind of behavior codes are most suitable. And for that reason, they need expertise and competencies and knowledge and skills. And only then change can be improvement. So it's not straightforward when talking about change that we also talk about improvement and innovation. It's a quite tricky process. And all learning aims at developing expertise, broadening our scope, and improving our capacities and action repertoires. Pooling all these ideas together in a game session, then I make a distinction between a macro cycle and a micro cycle. And in the macro cycle, you enter a game setting, you receive a briefing, reading manuals, and you are allowed or invited or challenged to assume roles. And then you step into actually playing the game, and that is what I call the micro cycle. So actually playing the game is a very active process for all the players. And once the stop rule has been applied and the game is over, the game setting as such is not over, because in that case I make a distinction between two kinds of debriefing. Especially when you play games for a couple of days, and these games are very intriguing, and people are very highly involved, they need to blow off steam. And for that reason I use the first debriefing. You might say I use the first debriefing as reviewing the video. So people recognize what happened and why it happened. And that takes 1 to 3 hours, and if it's a very complicated business game, to go through the first debriefing. But then everyone has shared their experiences during the game. And at that moment, and you notice when the debriefing is ending, as coming to an end, then you see that people understand each other, understand what they did and why they did it. And then I start with the second debriefing, and actually then I use the debriefing to ask about key concepts and the ways these concepts are related. And when the second debriefing is over, you might say both debriefing 1 and debriefing 2 are reflection about action. And then after debriefing 2, it's usually people leave the setting, but also it's possible to enter again and again move into the microcycle. For the idea of the macrocycle, I use Heisinger's concept of the magic circle. Because when you enter a game, you enter a magic circle. You might say a social organization on a temporary basis. You assume your roles, and then you play the game of that social system, becomes actually your playground. And again, you see here the social system and games are very highly intertwined. When you look more carefully into the microcycle, usually Dave Kolb uses it, the learning cycle, but that's much, to my mind, it's too much a focus on a linear process, a linear sequence. And I do not believe in linear sequence, especially when the game is a complex one. And people enter at different stages because of different learning styles. Some people I see, they have read their briefing manuals, and they have assumed from, and they right away start acting. So they start with actions and interacting and activity awareness. Other people start trying to make sense of what's going on. So they enter sense making and meaning constructions. And then still others, while they have read the player manual, they start already on the basis of what they understand, they already start adjusting their action repertoires. Anyhow, people enter different stages for themselves, enter the microcycle, and then the game starts moving. And some are busy with adjusting action repertoire, some are busy with actions and interaction activity and awareness raising, some are trying to make sense and are involved in meaning construction, but all are busy, while playing the game, with formation and adjustment of schemas. And schemas is a very interesting concept, because actually schemas, the way our brain works, is that we develop schemas, and schemas actually are perception action repertoires. So we see, we observe, we perceive, and in our perception is already, the action is preconditioned. So perception action repertoires are actually what continuously are triggered, are challenged while playing games. So in the microcycle, people are somewhere in this space of the microcycle playing. And they are communicating. Some are communicating on adjusting action repertoire, sense making, etc. So it's a highly interactive activity that almost is completely unobservable for the facilitator. You know that it happens, and you see some patterns with the learning styles of people, but you do not know actually what's happening in their minds. Only what you know is that this is happening in general terms, on an aggregate level. Okay, now talking about the idea of action perception repertoires, to understand what's gaming all about in combination with, let's say, action perception repertoires, we have to be aware of what is called the theory of mind. And in the theory of mind, we distinguish 4 levels. The first level is I know. It's a very basic level, and many organisms stay at that level. I know. Other organisms in their evolution move to level 2. I know. So I'm aware of myself. I'm aware that I am me, that I have a self, some kind of identity. The third level is I know, you know. And that requires a mental state that I'm aware of not only what I know, but also have some ideas of what others know. And the representation of what I know and the representation of what another knows might differ. Adults know more than a child, but at least they know that the other one knows. Level 4 is I know, you know, I know. And that's a level of meaning processes, of tricks, of tricky behavior. And I would say that for playing games, you need at least achieved level 3, and especially you need at least achieved level 4. Animals, elephants, dogs, bears, dolphins, and many others, they have reached level 3, and some of them also have already reached in their evolution level 4. And you see that those animals are able to trick other animals. So in terms of games, and in, let's say, the way the human brain works in terms of action repertoire and action perception repertoires, we need to be aware that in terms of theory of mind, we need at least to fully take advantage of gaming, we need to use level 4 kind of understanding. Now, with this idea in mind, I skip to tacit knowing and embodied knowing. And this is very important also from the point of view of theory of knowledge, of epistemology. Because in gaming, we use a theory of knowledge which is quite different from theory of knowledge in the analytical sciences. In the analytical sciences, knowledge starts with developing concepts. And once you have these concepts in mind and they are tested, then you use that knowledge to take action. You can still use that idea, that theory of knowledge, but in gaming, you have another, you might say, competitive idea of knowledge. Is first you act, and then you understand, I act, what kind of knowledge was at stake? And when playing games, it's not purely that you work and operate like a robot. You have feelings, you are frustrated, you enjoy success when playing games. So embodied knowing is a very important part of playing games and theorizing about games. And now, to give you a bit idea of what tested knowing, the idea of tested knowing, what it means, I show you 3 dimensions. The first dimension is the awareness dimension. On the one hand, you see the focus, and on the other hand, you see the background of subsidiary knowledge. You are focused on me, so I'm in your focus, and this room is organized in a way that I'm in the focus of your attention. And you listen to me, so I'm very much in the focus. Now your focus is switching. Now I'm background and Willy is your focus. And in the way we orient ourselves in space, especially in, let's say, in spaces like this, is that we continuously are switching in our awareness dimension from what's in my focus and what becomes background. So that is one dimension. It's a very powerful dimension when you play games. You always are continuously switching between what's in your focus, your gestalt, and what is your background. The second dimension is the activity dimension. It can be purely conceptual, so a thinking act. And it can be purely a bodily activity. That you do something, but you don't think about it, not explicitly. It happens. So this is the activity dimension. The third dimension is the articulation dimension. And it's, on the one hand, it's pronounced, and the other hand, it's silent, inner speech. In terms of the articulation dimension, I'm very pronounced. But I could stop talking, I could show you all the slides that I have available, and I think about it, and you make up your mind, I forget about it. In that case, I'm silent about and I use my inner speech, but I'm not pronounced. So the articulation dimension, also in gaming, is very important because some people are reluctant or not willing to share ideas. They are not pronounced, they are silent for certain reasons. Maybe strategic reason, because in terms of theory of mind, they want to trick me. It's all part of the game. It's also part of playing games. So if you combine these 3 dimensions, then you see the following space. And at the upper left, you see the explicit knowing, and the bottom right, you see tacit knowing. And when we play games, a part of playing games and assuming roles and writing manuals and designing games is that we use explicit knowing for the design. But once the game starts and we start playing games, at that moment, tacit knowing becomes a very integral part of the game experience. And even in this 3-dimensional spaces, in these 3-dimensional spheres, I have drawn them as if they have the same kind of volume. But when you read recent advances in neuroscience and cognitive science, then you see that actually what we know as explicit knowing, as related to what our body knows, then I would say that the explicit knowing volume is less than 20%, and the bottom right tacit knowing covers more than 80% of what we know, how we orient ourselves, how we make sense of the world. Could even be 5% to 95%. So if we talk about change and the journey of change and mapping the process, I would say 95% is embodied knowing. We are not explicitly aware of it, what's happening. And only 5% of what's happening, what we understand, is explicit knowing. So it is quite tricky when you think about enhancing change and thinking about tacit knowing, because tacit knowing in organizations, in companies, in societies, actually helps us because we develop as a child an inner compass from the society and the culture we live in. That also happens when you work in an organization. We develop an inner compass to navigate through the organization, to navigate through society. And as such is a silent language. Tacit knowing has a peculiar capacity, because most of the things that our body knows we cannot express in language. We need other kinds of images, if any, are available. And they're also called unwritten rules of the game, codes of conduct. The expression of tacit knowing is, Carl Weick has covered this in a very interesting way. It says, how can we know what we feel until we see what we say, or until we hear what we do? Until we see what we do and hear what we say. You can also say, how can we know what we want until we see what we do? So we can make all kinds of variations. But the core idea is, you know, you are aware of your explicit knowing only after you have acted. And while playing games, we act, and after we have acted, we start reflecting on it. So playing games and connecting games with learning and education is actually learning by doing, reflection in action. And that's a very different theory of knowledge as being pursued in analytical sciences, because there you start with very explicit knowing, you develop patterns of understanding and theories, you test these theories, and then you start making predictions. But the concept, the explicit knowing, is where you start. And in gaming, it's not explicit knowing as such where you start. No, you play games, and through games you learn what kind of person you are and how you engage yourself in social situations. When we are involved in all kinds of social activities, we are continuously involved in meaning construction, trying to understand what's happening, making sense of it. And here you see 4 types of knowledge that are related to it. It's explicit knowing. It's encoded. You can send as encoded information through the internet. You have tacit knowing, which is to a large extent is embodied. But also you usually need to be aware of the fact that local knowing is an important issue. Even you have, let's say, take for example a national bank with subsidiaries in all places and all cities. Then in every city, because of the local knowledge of the people living there, you need that local knowledge to run your bank in that city, which is different from running the same bank in another city. It's not completely the same. And we all grow up in certain cultures, so that we develop a certain mentality. In French they call it outillage mental. And these combinations of knowledge help us to engage and experience in action. It's generating meaning. It helps us in the need for understanding, what's in German called verstehen. If you connect this general idea of how we position ourselves in social settings and you connect it to gaming, then you say a game is a designed experience. And a game session is experience in action and, as I said before, reflection in action. I mentioned that design is intended change. And to wrap up my presentation, I would like to point out that the intellectual activity that produces material artifacts is not fundamentally different from the one that prescribes remedies for sick patients, or the one that devises new sales plans for a company, a social welfare policy for the state, or a new educational program. So all these activities that are related to organizational or societal change are actually design processes. We design these plans of actions. They are artifacts. And we can use that general framework of changing a situation, changing an organization. We can use games to enhance those processes. So the idea of design is the core of all inquiry that creates artifacts that serve human purposes. Design is a journey of intended change, and playful gaming is a core activity to enhance the related processes of development and innovation in social systems. Design, so understood, couples design in the small, you might say the instrumental design of a specific game, with design in the large, to use that game to implement change in the social system, in the organization. And that's design in the large in terms of organizational and social innovation. And the general framework for mapping the process of change looks as follows. This is a loop. And let's say you enter the loop at design in the small. You start designing a game for a certain client with a certain purpose and being used in a certain context. Then that game, once it has been designed and it is operational, you start using that game as artifact to make people aware of the situation they're operating in, they're living in. In that case, the game becomes an intervention in organization development perspective. And through that intervention, the social system changes, hopefully in the direction you wanted or hoped to be, that it will change, the desired direction. And that loop of intervention and social system development can go on and can go on and so on. But also it might mean that through this intervention, new ideas emerge, new questions emerge. So it means that you have to go back to the drawing board to make adjustment to the existing games or design a completely new game. And then you enter this design in the large loop again. So it's a continuous process. The focus here, as you see, is design science. You might also say, after several rounds of going through this cycle, this feedback loop, that you say, well, now I feel the need to develop some theories of what's happening. In that case, you use the game as an artifact, but then you use the game as a theory, as a method for research. And then you enter the analytical sciences. And then you follow procedures of the methodology, the research methodologies of the analytical sciences. So as a game scientist, as you have the opportunity to switch between two very distinct domains of research. Many colleagues, many scholars don't have that opportunity because they are stuck in the analytical sciences. We are not. We can make changes the way we think it fits our interest and our curiosity. So again, we have the opportunity to switch between two distinct domains of knowledge production. The analytical science is very much focused on conceptual knowledge, on explicit knowledge development, on theory development and theory testing. And the design sciences, you might say, are very much involved in what's called communities of practice. I will not elaborate, go into detail, the differences. So this is actually my core idea on how to proceed the journey of change, not mapping the process, because as I map a process, I'm an observer, I'm an outsider, I'm neutral, I see what's happening. I like to be involved. In that case, I frame change. And framing change is another word for designing change. Design to improve a certain situation into a desired one. And that's basically what I see are the real challenges for our kind of sports. Thank you. I guess there are no questions, so we can leave the room. Yes?
Thank you, Jan. Inspiring talk. I have two questions. You hear me?
Yes?
Okay. To go back to this triangle in which you say something about meaningful play and how it emerges.
Okay, hang on. I go back to... Yes. Yeah.
So you say play and meaningful play emerge from the game concept, the game form, and the game context.
Yes, and the interplay between these three emerges the meaning of play.
What can we say about the role of the game facilitator in this context?
The game facilitator is not part of the game form. The game facilitator is, if he is doing well his job, is not included in the game content. He is included, he is related, linked to game context. He helps the players to understand, let's say, the messages contained within the game setting. So actually the role of the facilitator and debriefer is actually from the point of view of game context. If you use a game for training, then the facilitator has to know the goals of that training. And by knowing the goals and also the context of use and the target audience, he tries to make meaning and conveys that meaning, if asked for, to the players.
What is the importance of that role to you?
Beg your pardon?
How important is that role to you?
As facilitator, a facilitator can destroy the game. That's a clear answer, I guess.
But,
I have developed several management games, so-called free-form games, as a self-organizing learning environment. So I start those games with giving the players information about the situation. And then the situation from different perspectives, from different roles. So it's a multiple reality setting at the start. And then I say, well, we start now, and there is a stop rule. Let's say 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You see what's the situation, and then I ask, not how will you solve it, but how will you deal with it? And then actually my role is, as a facilitator, I can sit in the back of the room and they have to find out themselves. And only if they got stuck and they ask me, help us, we don't know how to go further, how to advance. And then I, if necessary and if asked, I give some answers, but I stay in the background. So they are very powerful games, a self-organizing learning environment, where as a facilitator, you don't need to be in the room. But now comes the key question. You are the key during debriefing. If you run a debriefing of such a game, which requires quite a lot of understanding how to handle these kind of debriefings, actually then you see that people are very well aware and capable of running their own situation and learn from it. So although in this case as a debriefer, actually I facilitate the debriefing. Yes? Yeah.
Playing games, we create knowledge, but we create knowledge about that analogy. This remains for me confusing and a basic doubt about games as the instrument of knowing and creating knowledge about reality.
Yeah. It's a very basic question you raise, and it's one of the questions that pop up when people start thinking about how do you evaluate games, and that's an ongoing discussion. And in my answer, I am sure I will not be satisfying, but I will give you an answer and see how it helps. On the one hand, your question raises the question about, is a game a virtual reality with no connection to real world? And what I learn in those kind of games, could I use it elsewhere? Or is it that what I learn through gaming, I can transfer to outside situations? There are certainly games where you learn things that are to a high degree restricted, let's say, to knowledge within the magic circle. And many entertainment games apply to that kind of understanding. But when you keep in mind this scheme, that the meaning of play is a combination of game content, game form, and game context, then it's possible to use a game as a metaphor. And in combination with the game as a metaphor and the impact of the metaphor on our perception action repertoires, we are capable of transferring the knowledge gained within the magic circle to transfer it outside the magic circle and apply it to situations that are similar to the ones that I, as player, engage in the game. But that kind of explicit knowing you can evaluate. The kind of embodied knowing, tacit knowing, it's much more difficult to track. And I think when you look at advances in, again, to neurocognitive sciences and brain research, we are just entering the field that we are able, through studying the way our brain behaves under certain circumstances, what kind of impact it might have on emotions, on perception action repertoires, and let's say on a general understanding on what a specific game means in a specific setting. So what the meaning of a game is in that setting, and then only once we start to gather those ideas, see how they apply to and can be transferred to other situations. But keep one thing in mind, which is very important. One way of learning, especially for kids, but also applies when we are adults, we learn by copying what we see from other people, the way they behave. When you look at, yesterday you have seen Spain, Italy playing, very different styles of teamwork. And all other teams in Europe, and I think all over the world, are starting to copy, to mirror the play style of the Spanish team. So you learn by using those examples, you make that an embodied perception action repertoire for yourself. And you use that setting for very different settings. So learning is much more than only conceptual learning. The difficult is tacit knowing, tacit learning. And as you have been involved in sports, then you know when you learn a certain skill in the wrong way, that it takes quite a lot of time to unlearn it and to learn a new kind of skill to replace it. So actually, these are very new fields of challenge for game science, but I would say for everyone involved in training and education. No further questions? Are you satisfied? Okay.
That is about the model for sense making.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Which one do you mean?
There's the three axes: awareness, activity, and articulation. Oh,
This one.
no, the one before, the three axes. You.
This one.
I find it an intriguing way, you sort of, this is what I find interesting about the entire talk, you sort of try and combine the systemic view on games with the more individual
Yes.
view on human cognition,
Yeah.
which is, I think, I haven't seen it a lot. And this may be a way to combine the two. To what extent has this model been validated through empirical research yet? Or is this something that we can work on in the future?
Well, the framework as such has not been validated yet, but it's based on 3 years of knowledge on epistemology and philosophy. It's based on educational sciences and empirical research. So there are many fields that are not connected that I combined in this scheme. But as such, it has not, it has empirically, it has not been tested. But I see this as the basic way we navigate ourselves into physical and in social space. We always are busy navigating and making sense of what's happening through using these dimensions. So that's on an individual level. And what you do as a game designer, actually, you design the social and physical space in which people use this navigating system to find what they are doing while playing a game. But in that sense, once you have learned that trick, you can use that trick in settings outside the game. So in that way, you can generalize the way you make sense of things to all kinds of situations. That's the advantage of, let's say, from a game scientific point of view, looking at games as a metaphor for life. Okay. No further questions? Well, I thank you for your attention.
Te învățăm cum să plătești impozite și taxe mai mici, avem prețuri corecte și transparente, folosim tehnologia în avantajul tău. Facem contabilitate din 2002, te scăpăm de grija contabilității, avem prețuri corecte și transparente, îți spunem cum să plătești impozite și taxe mai mici, folosim tehnologia în avantajul tău. Facem contabilitate din 2002, te scăpăm de grija contabilității și a declarațiilor. Îți spunem cum să plătești impozite și taxe mai mici, avem prețuri corecte și transparente, folosim tehnologia în avantajul tău, îți răspundem rapid la întrebări.